Hello, my name is Jordan, and this is my book report. This is my book, The Book Thief. It was written by Markus Zusak. This book is historical fiction, and the reason it is because even though the story is fake, the setting is in a real time and place. Some aspects of this book that I really liked is the way it was written, the diction, and the overall story. Now I'm going to be reading you my favorite chapter in the book, Part 6, The Snowman. The Snowman. For Liza Memminger, the early stages of 1942 could be summed up like this. She began 13 years of age. Her chest was still flat. She had not yet bled. The young man from her basement was now in her bed. Q&A. How did Max Vanderbilt end up in Liesel's bed? He fell. Opinions varied, but Rosa Huberman claimed that the seeds were sown at Christmas the previous year. December 24th had been hungry and cold, but there was a major bonus, no lengthy visitations. Hans Jr. was simultaneously shooting at Russians and maintaining his strike on the family interaction. Trudy could only stop by on the weekend before Christmas for a few hours. She was going away with her family of employment, a holiday for a very different class of Germany. On Christmas Eve, Liza brought down a double handful of snow as a present for Max. Close your eyes, she'd say. Hold out your hands. As soon as the snow was transferred, Max shivered and laughed. But he still didn't open his eyes. He only gave the snow a quick taste, allowing it to sink onto his lips. Is this today's weather report? Liza stood next to him. Gently she touched his arm. He raised it again to his mouth. Thanks, Liza. It was the beginning of the greatest Christmas ever. Little food, no presents, but there was a snowman in their basement. After delivering the first handfuls of snow, Liza checked that no one else was outside, then proceeded to take as many buckets and pots out as she could. She then filled them with mounds of snow and ice that blanketed the small strip of world that was Himmel Street. Once they were full, she brought them in and carried them down the basement. All things being fair, she first threw a snowball at Max, then collected a reply in the stomach. Max even threw one at Hans Huberman as he made his way down the basement steps. Papa yelped, Liza, give me some of that snow. A whole bucket. For a few minutes they all forgot. There was no more yelling or calling out, but they could not contain the small snatches of laughter. They were only humans playing in the snow in a house. Papa looked at the snow-filled pots. What do we do with the rest of it? A snowman, Liza replied. We have to make a snowman. Papa called out to Rosa. The usual distant voice hurled back. What is it now? Come down here, will you? When the wife appeared, Hans Huberman risked his life by throwing the most excellent snowball at her, just missing. It disintegrated when it hit the wall. And Mama had an excuse to swear for the long time without taking a breath. Once she recovered, she came down and helped him. She even brought the buttons for the eyes and a nose, and some string for a snowman's smile. Even a scarf and hat were provided for what was really only a 2-foot man of snow. A midget, Max had said. What do we do when it melts? Liza asked. Rosa had the answer. You mop it up, in a hurry. Papa disagreed. It won't melt. He rubbed his hands and blew into them. It's freezing down here. Melt it did, though, but somewhere in each of them, that snowman was still upright. It must have been in the last thing they saw that Christmas Eve when they finally fell asleep. There was an accordion in their ears, a snowman in their eyes, and for Liza there was the thought of Max's last words before she left him by the fire. Christmas greetings from Max Vanderbilt. Often I wish this would all be over, Liza, but then somehow you do something like walk down the basement steps with a snowman in your hands. Unfortunately, the night signaled a severe downslide in Max's health. The early signs were innocent enough and typical. Constant coldness, swimming hands, increased visions of boxing with the Fuhrer. It was only when he couldn't warm up after his push-ups and sit-ups that it truly began to worry him. As close to the fire as he sat, he could not raise himself to any degree of approximate health. Day by day, his weight began to stumble off him. His exercise regimen faltered and fell apart. With his cheek against the surly basement floor. All throughout January, he managed to hold himself together, but by early February, Max was in worrisome shape. He would struggle to wake up next to the fire, sleeping well into the morning instead. His mouth distorted and his cheekbones started to swell. When asked, he said he was fine. In mid-February, a few days before Liza was 13, he came to the fireplace on the verge of collapse. He nearly fell into the fire. Hans, he whispered. His face seemed to cramp, his legs gave way, and his head hit the accordion case. At once, a wooden spoon fell into some soup, and Rosa Huberman was by his side. She held Max's head and barked across the room at Lizel. Don't just stand there. Get extra blankets. Take them to your bed. And you, Papa was next. Help me pick him up and carry him to Lizel's room. Papa's face was stretched with concern. His gray eyes clanged, and he picked him up on his own. Max was as light as a child. Can't we put him in here in our bed? Rosa was already considered that. No, we have to keep these curtains open in the day or else it looks suspicious. Good point. Hans carried him out. Blankets in hand, Lizel watched. Limp feet and hanging hair in the hallway. One shoe had fallen off him. Move. Mama marched in behind them in her waddlesome way. Once Max was in the bed, blankets were heaped on top and fastened around his body. Mama, Lizel couldn't bring herself to say anything else. What? The bun of Rosa Huberman's hair was wound tight enough to frighten from behind. It seemed to tighten further when she repeated the question. What, Lizel? It stopped. She stepped closer, afraid the answer. Is he alive? The bun nodded. Rosa turned, then said something with great assurance. Now listen to me, Lizel. I didn't take this man into my house to watch him die. Understand? Lizel nodded. Now go. In the hall, Papa hugged her. She desperately needed it. Later on, she heard Hans and Rosa speaking in the night. Rosa made her sleep in their room. She lay next to their bed. On the floor, on the mattress, they dragged it from the basement. There was concern as to whether it was infected, but they came to the conclusion that such thoughts were unfounded. There is no virus Max was suffering from, so they carried up and replaced the sheet. Imagining the girl to be asleep, Mama voiced her opinion. That damn snowman, she whispered. I bet it started with the snowman, fooling around with ice and snow in the cold down there. Papa was more philosophical. Rosa, it started with Adolf. He left it himself. We should check on him. And in the course of the night, Max was visited 7 times. Max Vanderberg's visitor score sheet. Hans Huberman, 2. Rosa Huberman, 2. Lizel Memminger, 3. In the morning, Lizel brought him his sketchbook from the basement and placed it on the bedside table. She felt awful for having looked at it the previous year, and this time she kept it firmly closed out of respect. When Papa came in, she did not turn to face him, but talked across Max Vanderberg at the wall. Why did I have to bring all that snow down? She asked. It started all of this, didn't it, Papa? She clenched her hands as if to pray. Why did I have to build that snowman? Papa, to his enduring credit, was adamant. Lizel, he said, you had to. For hours, she sat with him as he shivered and slept. Don't die, she whispered. Please, Max, just don't die. He was the second snowman to be melting away before her eyes. Only this was different. It was a paradox. The colder he became, the more he melted. Now that was my chapter. It gets much more interesting from here on, so if you want to figure out what happens, you're going to have to go check it out by yourself, and I hope you enjoyed.